G'day folks, this is just a follow-up video from the one I did earlier about printing a very first frame app to print some plain text. This time I'm going to print an image, or I'm going to display a sprite in the frame, which makes it a little bit more interesting than the text only one. And in this case we're just going to make a little sprite pop around the screen randomly, and I'll show you a little bit about how that works. So the sprite that I chose was this little rocket. It was a Creative Commons rocket that I found, and I've just pasted that into Libre Sprite, which has mapped it to the 16 color indexed palette that Frame already has on it. That's just going to keep it a bit simpler. But I've saved that as a 16 color PNG file in Libre Sprite, and that's a convenient format to use to load these sprites into the simple frame app framework. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to continue building on top of that My Frame app. I was going to show how to copy that project and rename it and whatever, but I'll keep it really simple and just build on top of My Frame app and make this one a sprite displaying app. So where do we start? Well, what I'm going to start with is putting this sprite into the assets directory of My Frame app. So if I go in here, back into the code, I will see that I have an assets directory with just the Lua code in it. I'm going to go ahead and create a sprites folder. Oops, sprites. And inside that sprites folder, I'm just going to put this rocket file. Now, the convention that I've adopted is that you might remember from the first one that when we send messages from the phone to the frame, and likewise back from the frame to the phone, we have a 1 byte code, message code, and we often refer to those codes in hex, hexadecimal. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to call this rocket image, I'm going to call it 20 underscore, now that's hex 20. And what that's going to do is there's a little bit of magic in the framework here, which is just by the convention that if it finds a number at the start there, it's going to convert that into a byte, and it's going to call that the byte message code for this particular sprite. So it gives this sprite an identity. So when I'm in the frame code, I can refer to this sprite just as sprite number hex 20. So by setting it up this way, actually when I run through the startup sequence of the app, it's actually going to look for sprites and then send them across to frame before the app even starts. So they're going to be there waiting for the app when it starts. Although in order to really make that work, I do need to do one more thing, which is that it needs to be added here to the assets list within the pubspec file. So I'm going to just go ahead and add that one there, and that's going to be 20 underscore rocket.png. Okay, so that's in there now. I'm actually not going to need plain text anymore, and in fact last time I had Sprite in here and I didn't need it actually, but I'm going to leave it in here now because I will need it, but I don't need plain text anymore. I'm just going to clean up a couple of things that we don't really need this time around. Now over here in the frame.lua, I won't need plain text anymore. I'm just going to clean that out. Don't need this anymore. So the user sprite is this 20. So this is just an identifier here to reflect this sprite. I'm going to go ahead and rename that just to rocket sprite sprite, and I should have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or so. That's about all. And then text message, I'm not going to be sending a text message anymore, so that's gone. And then this clear message, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it so that the phone app, every time it sends a message with code 10, the frame app is just going to put the rocket in a different random location. So I still need a message. I could create a new one or whatever, but I'll just use this again. But I'm going to call it move message. 1, 2, 3, 4 of those over there. Now, so I've got these two messages coming from the phone to the frame, and I've got no messages going back from the frame. But if I had a camera or an IMU or something else that I was using on the frame, I would have a message code for stuff going back the other way. But now, I didn't talk much about this in the first one, but this is this data library that I've made, which can make all of these objects available to your frame app, indexed by their code using these parsers. So this parser knows how to unpack a sprite when it's sent from the phone side using this framework. But again, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail this time around. The code is all there if you want to look at it, of course, in the package. So this is the main app loop. So this is really all that's going to happen now. I'm going to start off by clearing the display. That's fine. And then I'm going to loop forever here. This is a while true. And every time I loop, I just see if there's any new messages from the phone. And if there are, I'm going to start processing them. Well, like I said, I'm going to simplify this. I'm not going to print any text strings anymore. So I'm just going to get rid of that. This one here, if there's a message with a code of Rocket Sprite, this would display it. But actually that's not quite what I want to do anymore. I want to load this Rocket Sprite into memory on frame on app startup, which will happen automatically, like I said. And it's actually on the move message when I want to display it. So I'm going to get rid of this handling. I'll say show the sprite, and this is the code to show a bitmap on frame. But actually what I want to do is when it's a move message, that's when I want to show the sprite actually, and it's able to pull this out because it'll be preloaded in that table in Lua, and I don't need this at all. So this at runtime, this Lua app actually only responds to one command, which is this move command. And at the moment I'm just going to put it at 1,1, so that's just in the top left hand corner of the screen, and we can update that in 1 second. A little bit later anyway. And then this little last bit here just checks if it's been a couple of minutes, then send the updated battery level to the phone so you know what's going on. Anyway, so this is a pretty short piece of code. This is the app that runs on frame. It does one thing. Whenever it gets told to move a sprite, it just paints it, well in this case at 1,1. I'm going to save that. Pub spec YAML I think is fine. It's got everything in it now. I could start to change the name and so on. But I won't. That's the sprite. Now what happens in the phone side app? What's different? Well, if you remember where we left off, there was just this sent a bit of plain text, then it slept for a while, then it tried to do a clear reasonably unsuccessfully. Well, now I'm not going to do much of that at all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to send, remember this message code is actually just the message that paints the sprite, and it's a message code 10. So does that line up with what we have here in frame? Yes, it is. So the move message is message code 10. So if I send a message code 10, then it should paint the sprite at 1,1. So we'll see, I think we've now got enough for that to actually just happen. So why don't we do that? I'm going to save that. Now I'm going to stop this app that's running here, which was the image generation app. I'm going to close all that. I'm just going to say run. And let's see how we go. So really, this isn't even the code. There is a command called tx sprite, and you can provide some sprite data in that command, that object, and send it to frame at runtime. But because I've used this convention where I've packaged up the sprite as an asset, it's actually going to do it when I click start, and when it sends all the Lua files over, it's also going to send all of the PNG files over. So you won't even see a tx sprite call here. But if you have a program that needs to make a sprite at runtime, then you would use a tx sprite message instead of a tx code, and away you go there. But anyway, so I've woken up the frame. I'm going to click connect. Getting some logs. It's connected to frame. I didn't mention this before, but it actually prints the firmware of the frame in addition to the memory usage. That's sometimes good to really work out if you're on the right firmware. I now click start, and when I click start, I expect to send all of the Lua files, and then all of them need to be sent over because it uses the data one to process the sprite, and it's going to send the sprite over next. So that's all started. So now when I press, if I've done everything correctly, when I press start, we might see a rocket ship in 1,1, and we do. So here's the rocket ship in 1,1. The lighting's not amazing there, but it is actually in color. And then if I press it again, you won't see much change because it's actually still just going to paint it at 1,1. But that's a pretty good start. So now there's a couple of ways we could make it move. And I normally am in favor of driving a lot of things from the phone app because that's really the place that's easiest to program a state machine, I think. But in this case, to make it dead simple, I'm just going to, every time we send this message that's simply just message code 10 from the phone app, we're going to put the bitmap in a random location. And I didn't know what the random function in Lua is. I don't know if you did, but it's math.random, and you've got a couple of ways you can call it, or three in fact, with no parameters or with one or with two. And it turns out this one's actually a pretty good one, this with one parameter, a random number which will be an integer between 1 and x. And the screen coordinates of the frame, when you talked about them in Lua at least, are between 1 and 640 wide and 1 and 400 high. So we actually want coordinates that start at 1. That's a bit of a change if you're not accustomed to Lua. But anyway, so here I actually just want to say math.random, and you might think I want between 1 and 640, but this sprite turns out is 85 pixels wide. So it's an 85 by 150 sprite. So I actually want a number between 1 and 640 minus 85. Now you could do that arithmetic if you wanted to, but I can just leave it like this, math.random, and then the height, I want it to be 1, comma, then 400 minus 150. So the top left-hand pixel of this image is going to be a random number chosen between these ranges, and then it's going to just put the spaceship somewhere there. So again, this only does that when it gets told to move it, and it'll get told to move it at the moment precisely once. So that's not going to be amazing, but we should see it go into a random location. So I'm going to have to restart the app. I'm just going to stop it, and I don't know whether it's going to update the Lua. If I just press start, I might have to. I'll see actually. This is what I didn't know last time, whether I needed to fully restart it. I've been mostly restarting it, but now if I press start and start again and start again, yeah. No, so it is the case that I need to stop and then disconnect and then actually close this app in order for VS Code to know that it needs to package up a new asset. This frame app.lua needs to be put in the package again, or in the app bundle. So that's now building again. So this time we're expecting it to go into a random place. Each time I press the run button, the icon, it's going to go into a random location on the screen, if that's working correctly. So I just need to tap to wake up the frame. Tap, tap. There we go, woken up, connect. And then start. So again, this is going to send a few Lua files, and then it's going to send the sprite as well. What have I done? No, of course it's going to have a blank screen. So now I'll press run, and it should start. And each time I press run, it just jumps into a different location. So each time I press it, it just pops around there. So this is the beginning of a pretty exciting game. I can't rotate that sprite at the moment, so it's always pointing upwards. But okay, so now we're moving it around, and that's, in some sense, it's driven here from the phone side, and in some sense it's happening on the frame side. But we can at least do a little bit more on the phone side. And one good thing about Dart I mentioned is that it does this hot reloading. So what we can easily do here is I can put in a while loop. While looping, I want to send a message to move the rocket ship, and then I'm going to do an await of future.delayed duration of seconds to, something like that. And of course it wants me to make that const, which is fine. And so now it's going to do it in a loop, and to exit that loop I'm going to use the cancel button. So that icon that I use to run, it becomes a cancel button when it's running. So here if I just say set looping equals false, then that will allow it to cancel out of the that. And in fact here I can even get rid of this because I don't really want to change the application state. I want to instruct the main loop to cleanly shut itself down, and then when it does, it will set the state to ready, which is actually what I want. And before I start the loop, I want to set it to true. And because I'm accessing this variable in a couple of places, I'm going to put it up here. This is going to be, and I put an underscore because it's a variable in the class. So looping equals, it doesn't matter what I started as here, but it's a Boolean. So this is the one flag that it's going to decide when this thing starts and stops, and what we can expect now is that it will paint the rocket in a random place. It's going to wait for 2 seconds, and then it's going to do it all over again until I press cancel. And this one, if I press save here, it says Flutter hot reloading. If I start it again now, we should see every 2 seconds it just pops around, and I'm not touching anything there. That's just going to keep going until I click cancel. So now we realize we can have sort of a game loop running within the phone side, and really all we're instructing the frame side to do is render this sprite. And if it's a canned kind of sprite that is included with the game, then you can preload all of those in your asset sprites, preload them at the start when your app starts, and they'll get sent over, and you can just pull them out when you need them based on their index. So that's just a little convention that hopefully makes that simpler. If you're generating a sprite of your own at runtime, or you're pulling an image down from the web like the Wikipedia one or the image generation app that I made, then you need to construct a sprite at runtime, and so that's a little bit different, and then you send it over at runtime. You've got to wait for it to be sent while your app is running. But this one, if it's a little sprite that you might use for a heads-up display where you only have a handful of sprites, you can preload them, or even load them on demand, but you can preload them and then just reference them in a small program that runs on Frame, which is working in concert with messages passed from the phone. Anyway, that's really all I wanted to do there. Normally I might still go ahead and commit if we have a look at what changes we really made there. Let's just have a quick look. Git status, git diff, what did we change? Well, we removed a bunch of stuff to simplify the frame Lua, frameapp.lua, and then in the main.dart we introduced this variable to control the looping, and then we just looped around sending this one message, which actually, remember, it doesn't send the position or anything. All it does is just say redraw somewhere random. And then we had to make a couple of changes to the pub spec just to include the new image file. So that's an example of getting going pretty quickly with sprites. There is pretty limited memory, but you can have a bunch of small sprites with no trouble at all. And if they're 1-bit sprites, then you can have way more of them than if they're color 4-bit sprites. But that's really it. So if you have any questions about how that works, feel free to ask about it in probably a Discord is better than in the comments for this video. So please just go ahead and ask there, and I'll do my best to answer. Anyway, thanks very much.